Welcome to Ave Maria in the afternoon, examining the world through the lens of faith from the heart of the church to help us navigate the culture. Here's Dr. Marcus Peter.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us on this hour of Ave Maria in the afternoon. I'm Marcus Peter. We're going to open this hour by speaking with our friend Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. And we're going to talk about a lot of current events in light of church teaching or even church news. But one of the pieces of news that we will not be able to get to with some expansive detail will be the recent IRS tax code change that has now allowed for houses of worship, including churches, therefore, to make endorsements of particular political candidates and therefore parties. The IRS signed a court agreement allowing churches and other houses of worship to endorse candidates without risking their tax-exempt status. Now, we ought to think rightly about what this means, but I want to make very clear here that even if other Christian denominations go down the path of publicly endorsing particular candidates for political reasons, from the pulpit no less, the 1983 Code of Canon Law actually prohibits Catholic clergy from engaging in active participation in political parties, except in cases where the rights of the church are threatened or the promotion of the common good requires it, and then only in the judgment of competent ecclesiastical authority. Now, what does that mean? It very simply means that if there is a direct affront to morality, then the clergy have an obligation to speak up even within the liturgical setting, to catechize the faithful for the sake of making soundly informed prudential judgment decisions in morality of voting. Outside of that, priests are simply not endorsed to do that. And so the USCCB has made that very, very clear. Now, we open with this and other pieces of news with Dr. Matthew Bunson, and then we speak with Michael Matteson Miller of Acton University as well, Acton Institute. You and I are in a struggle over what it means to be a person. And so this human anthropology, the definition of the human person, this debate is at the core of all of our social, political, moral, economic, and scientific inquiries. We need to get that right before we get everything else right. All this after the headlines.
Thanks, Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone. This is your Ave Maria Radio News for Thursday, July 10th. It's the Feast of St. Almabrügge. Today's news is brought to you by the Ave Maria Family of Funds at AveMariaFunds.com. A new nationwide block against President Trump's order seeking to restrict birthright citizenship is now in effect. The federal judge also granting class action status in the case after the Supreme Court limited the ability of judges to block orders across the country through other means. The judge has stayed his order for 7 days, allowing the government time to appeal. Despite a change in the tax code, the USCCB will not endorse political candidates for public office in any elections. On Monday, the IRS signing a court agreement ending the 70-year-old Johnson Amendment, which prohibits nonprofit organizations from engaging in political campaigns. The USCCB releasing a statement this week clarifying that the church will not change its policy, writing, quote, "The church seeks to help Catholics form their conscience in the gospel so that they might discern which candidates and policies would advance the common good." Matthew Bunson has more in this hour of today's program. A Catholic diocese in California is telling its parishioners that they can stay home on Sundays if they're worried about ICE raids. San Bernardino Bishop Albert Rojas has issued a decree that allows his parishioners to miss Mass due to concerns over immigration raids. Rojas writing, quote, "Such fear constitutes a grave inconvenience that may impede the spiritual good of the faithful." The San Bernardino Diocese serves about 1.6 million Catholics. And the suspect in an attempted assassination of President Trump in Florida is asking a judge to let him represent himself. In a hearing today, Ryan Routh asking the judge to terminate his court-appointed federal public defenders. Routh is accused of staking out Trump for 12 hours with a rifle on Trump's golf course in September of 2024. From your Ave Maria Radio.net news desk, I'm Steve Clark.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Joining me as he does every week to talk about church news, current events in light of the teachings of the church is our friend Dr. Matthew Bunson of EWTN News. He's Vice President and Editorial Director there. And Matthew is a wealth of information pertaining to the events of the church in the world. Matthew, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing very well. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Always a joy to connect with you. We've got some happy news this time around. It's not all doom and gloom. So
Exactly.
I want to start.
Welcome change of pace.
It certainly is. And this Mass for the Care of Creation that Pope Leo XIV has just promulgated the formulary for, it really is following in vein of recent popes, especially since John Paul II. So what do we know about it?
Yeah, this is a very interesting thing in the sense that obviously everyone is focused on this idea that it was inspired by Pope Francis's famous encyclical Laudato Si. But as you said, something that I think is important, and that is that this type of a Mass is not unheard of. So, for example, the Mass for the Care of Creation will be part or is part of what are recognized as Masses and prayers for various needs and occasions.
Right.
So it's a specific type of Mass, and it follows very specific rules. So, for example, you have different Masses for civil events. You can have a Mass for the country, for the blessing of work, that sort of thing. And in that sense, then it sort of falls within certainly the tradition that we have of these types of Masses. And it can be specifically celebrated on a weekday, with the proviso, of course, that there aren't other liturgical celebrations that are required, certainly in the calendar, to take precedence. So obviously this follows all of the requirements liturgically to be met. And in this case, this is a Mass that is intended to, as the Vatican itself has said, to ask our Lord, to ask God for the care for creation. And while I'm sure that there are some who would sort of roll their eyes at the idea of it, and I think actually it's a beautiful type of a Mass, and I think that's one of the reasons why Pope Leo XIV celebrated the what I'm sure is one of the very first, if not the first, celebrations of this Mass.
You know, Matthew, I'm really glad you brought that up. This eye rolling really tends to be a reaction to modern secular, quote unquote, pseudo spirituality that has jettisoned God and therefore has overtly elevated and even worshipped the created order. In response to this formulary and this Mass becomes a right ordering of man and God, and therefore how man ought to view creation in light of God.
That's right. And you're making a really important point, Marcus, and that is that because the idea of the care of creation or care for creation has been at times so politicized and placed within sort of the umbra or the ethos of Gaia and the environment, that it seems at times become almost a secular religion. There has been a not surprising backlash or counter-reaction where any discussion of the care of creation, of being stewards of God's creation, which is what we're called to be, is either mocked or simply dismissed as just catering to this new secular religion. So I think a Mass like this helps us to reorient and to remind people of those requirements that we have as stewards of creation, to care for God's creation. And I think that's part of the goal, I think. Certainly Pope Francis had a similar goal. I had that goal in mind, but Pope Leo XIV now is placing it very nicely within the reality of authentic prayer, of authentic liturgy.
And that's precisely why we ought to be celebrating this. And in that same language of celebration, tell us about Cardinal Burke's jubilee of his priestly ministry.
Yeah, well, Cardinal Burke, of course, is somebody who is very well known to all of us. He's, for many people, something of a hero.
Yeah.
Certainly among what one classifies, I always hate to use political terms, but certainly among conservative Catholics. And he just celebrated his 50th year of priestly ministry. And obviously it's a time to celebrate in itself, but it is especially noteworthy because Pope Leo XIV has written what has been described as a very warm letter to Cardinal Burke, thanking him for his 50 years of priestly service, of ministry. And it comes obviously at a time with the background that it does of certain tensions that existed. I think we can put that in those terms. Between Cardinal Burke and Pope Francis.
Yeah.
And what I especially loved about it was that the letter itself is in Latin, which is not a surprising thing, given that it is a formal letter from the Holy Father. But I think it's especially meaningful because both Pope Leo XIV and Cardinal Burke are noted canonists. Cardinal Burke himself is considered one of the greatest canonists in the Church today. So a letter in Latin, and both of them obviously are very conversant in Latin. Cardinal Burke is one of those rare prelates who can speak fluently in Latin, I believe. So it has that meaning, but it's also just a wonderful way to communicate what exactly one wants to celebrate in a case like this. And if it's all right, I'd love to read the actual text. It's not very long.
Oh, yes, please.
I won't read it in the Latin, if that's okay.
I was hoping you'd do that. No.
But it's basically to our venerable brother Raymond Leo Cardinal Burke of the Holy Roman Church, Cardinal Priest of the Basilica of St. Agatha of the Goths at Rome, as he celebrates the golden jubilee of his priestly ordination in Rome, which he received as a priest of the Diocese of La Crosse. We thank him for the prompt service he has zealously carried out and the earnest care he has demonstrated, most especially for the law, which has also been of good service to the dicasteries of the Apostolic See. He has preached the precepts of the gospel according to the heart of Christ and has recounted his treasures, diligently offering his devoted service to the Church Universal, while anticipating the very best for him and under the watchful care of blessed Peter and Paul the Apostles. It is our good pleasure to impart our apostolic blessing to him and to those near to him, given at the Vatican, June 17th, in the holy year 2025, Pope Leo XIV. One thing that jumps out in this is the use of the plural when the Holy Father is referring to himself. Our good pleasure, impart our apostolic blessings, which is a very traditional way of popes referring to themselves, especially in formal documents. That was something that Pope Francis never did.
Yeah. In fact, like you mentioned, it's something Pope Francis never did, but it is not out of place to the pontifical tradition to have that kind of a collective language. Yes,
exactly. There is a certain plurality that you use the plural, especially in Latin, as a recognition of your position as head of the church. So it's not some assumption of some grand divine we.
Right.
It is simply a recognition of your place, your authority. And it's a tiny reminder, too, of the way that Pope Leo XIV has gone back to many of the traditions of the popes. And from that standpoint, this is just part of a very consistent trend that we've been seeing.
Yeah.
And when we go back to the relationship between Cardinal Burke and Pope Francis, we know that there was, at the very end of the pontificate, a meeting between, if I'm remembering correctly, between them. And there was a kind of rapprochement. But very famously, in 2023, Pope Francis told a gathering in the Vatican that he had taken away Cardinal Burke's stipend and his apartment in Rome, although as far as I'm aware, I could be mistaken, I don't think that actually happened.
Oh, okay, right.
At least in terms of the apartment.
My guest is Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President, Editorial Director of EWTN News. We're talking about church news. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Ave Maria in the Afternoon is underwritten by the following nonprofit organization: Real Estate for Life. Buying or selling your home or business property? Real Estate for Life can connect you with one of 1,400 pro-life real estate agents around the world. When Real Estate for Life receives a referral fee, they donate 70% to Ave Maria Radio and Human Life International. More information at realestateforlife.org or 877-LIFE-US1. That's realestateforlife.org.
Support for this Ave Maria radio program comes in part by the non-for-profit St. Anthony Services. Are you shopping for mortgage products, Catholic investing, Catholic health, real estate, or estate planning? StAnthonyServices.org can help you find a Catholic professional for these needs. They regularly connect faithful citizens with faith-based professionals that share our Christian values. More information at StAnthonyServices.org or 877-LIFE-US1.
Hello, Steve Ray here from Footprints of God Pilgrimages. Want to celebrate some amazing anniversaries this year in France? We'll visit Normandy Beach to celebrate our heroic military for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Also, the 100th anniversary of the canonization of St. Therese of Lisieux. Join us this October for our Saints and Shrines of France and a visit to the newly renovated Notre Dame Cathedral.
Find the Ave Maria Radio travel tab at avemariaradio.net.
You like pizza? Me too. And for that, we can thank our friend Tom Monahan. First, he starts with $900 and opens one pizza shop. Then it's worldwide, thousands of shops. But all this was just a warm-up for his greatest achievement yet. He built a university.
God inspired Tom to build up generations of men and women who have a hunger to reach the world for Christ. This place is Ave Maria University.
Visit avemaria.edu to see what's next.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, speaking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President, Editorial Director of EWTN News. So, Matthew, I want to shift gears a little to the newly named Chancellor of Toulouse, France, the Diocese of Toulouse, France. There's some controversy pertaining to the naming of the Chancellor, so let's be aware of that.
Yeah, so news continues to come out of the church in France, and some of it is not good news, certainly. Mm-hmm. The appointment of, say, a convicted a priest who had been previously convicted of raping a 16-year-old boy is to the position of diocesan chancellor. The decision was made by Archbishop Guy de Caramel, and the priest in question is Father Dominique Spina, as his chancellor and episcopal delegate for marriages. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this has created a bit of a firestorm, not just in the Toulouse diocese or archdiocese in France, but also across all of the church, in the sense of those who are concerned about the child protection and certainly the optics of this. We know that the priest was convicted in 2006 by the Tarbes Court of Appeals, mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the details of it are very, very grim reading. He was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment with 4 years to be served and 1 year suspended. The Archbishop de Caramel, has defended his decision mm-hmm. In a statement saying that he has taken, quote, the side of mercy, who had previously been working for 5 years in the diocesan archives, and tried to point out that the acts for which he was convicted took place 30 years ago, and then justified the appointment further by contending that this priest has done nothing in terms of actions for the last 30 years, and he no longer exercises past responsibility other than celebrating the Eucharist. But, as you can imagine, this is, as I was just saying, this has really created a bit of a firestorm.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this appointment was inevitably going to create such a firestorm. So,
yeah, and one of the things that is especially significant is that this is the appointment of somebody to the role of chancellor. Now, let's be clear that the role of chancellor varies a little bit in terms of its authority, as within a diocesan curia or within a chancery office, typically a lot of chancellors today don't wield the authority that they once did. Most of those powers have been shifted to the Vicar General into sort of basic practice. A chancellor is somebody who's especially taken up with the maintenance of records and archives and other things. However, it is very clear in canon law that anyone holding these types of positions, including somebody who's serving as chancellor, must be, and the code is clear, of unimpaired reputation and above all suspicion. Mm-hmm. So that raises the question, is this appointment even canonically allowed? And we'll have to see. This is a story, obviously, that we'll be following.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad we're able to talk about this and follow it for developments. And speaking of certain historical developments, at the very least, we had a mass celebrated in Canterbury Cathedral, and that's a moment in history.
It really is. So, for those who may not remember, the massive, magnificent Canterbury Cathedral is considered the cradle, the home of Christianity in England. Mm-hmm. And it has deep, deep roots. And, of course, was the location of the murder of St. Thomas Becket. And it was also then the place of his tomb, and it was, in its time, the most visited shrine, perhaps certainly in England, and perhaps in the highest ranks in Christendom. Thousands of pilgrims made their way to the tomb of Becket in Canterbury for centuries. And then in 1538, with the break of England from the church, King Henry VIII ordered the suppression of all veneration of Thomas Becket, and then, of course, laid utter waste to the great shrine and the crypt in Canterbury. That's all background to the fact that, fast forward hundreds of years, the 7th of July, which has traditionally been the Feast of the Translation of St. Thomas's relics, has been marked by the celebration of a Catholic Mass in Canterbury Cathedral for a while. But for the first time, certainly, since we can guess before the Reformation, it was celebrated by Archbishop Miguel Marie Buendia, who happens to be the Apostolic Nuncio to England. So this is a really significant moment to have the Pope's representative of the United Kingdom celebrating a Mass in this cathedral. Speaks volumes of the relationship that exists, but also the recognition, too, that there are these deep, deep Catholic roots to Canterbury Cathedral.
Right. And these Catholic roots not only should not be taken for granted. The fact of the matter is, as Anglicanism is waning in England right now, Catholicism is poised to provide a kind of pillar of Christianity and a stronghold for truth in what one would otherwise consider post-Christian England and Europe.
Yeah, exactly. And you can mark in some ways the steady decline of the Christian faith. And I'm trying not to be unfair here. You go back to 1170 and the murder of Becket. Yeah. Then you go to the outrageous and horrendous destruction of as they say, the dissolution of the monasteries, the massive levels of destruction that were wrought to Christian culture under King Henry VIII, and then certainly under what's called the Elizabethan era of Elizabeth I, in which Protestant Anglicanism really was imposed. And then you can see the steady erosion of the Christian culture in England, to the point now where, unfortunately, we are seeing rampant embrace of the culture of death. We have seen just in recent weeks the passage of the euthanasia, assisted suicide bill, of abortion without any limitations or restrictions. You're seeing the assaults on religious freedom, of the right to prayer, that sort of thing. Yeah. So, as you say, that is also accompanied at this juncture by a steady increase in the Catholic faith in England. and the number of people who are coming into the church. And I think one of the really striking things about a Mass like this is it is such a powerful symbol of this reemergence of Catholicism in England. And to have that Mass then celebrated by the Absolute Nuncio is not just symbolic. I think it is very important. And it's going to be interesting to see where things go from here. Now, the other aspect, too, that we want to keep an eye on when we're talking about the Anglicans is that they are still in the process of trying to select a new Archbishop of Canterbury. So how that plays out, too, is going to be of great interest, not just to the future of the Anglican Communion, but certainly to Anglican-Catholic relations.
We have about 30 seconds. Given the change of the new tax code and the reinterpretation of the Johnson Amendment, will the USCCB be allowing the endorsement of political candidates in churches?
No. The answer very, very, very simply is no. And I'm glad we had time just to even touch on this briefly because certainly the IRS has, as you say, signed a court agreement that would allow churches and houses of worship to endorse candidates. Whatever one thinks of that idea, it is very clear that the USCCB, as a body, is clear that no, this will not change. We do not endorse candidates. For us, it is so important to help people form their consciences to vote properly.
Matthew, always a joy to connect with you. Thank you for making the time.
A great joy to be with you. God bless.
My guest has been Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President, Editorial Director of EWTN News, and we've been talking about church news, some key events happening in the church and the world today. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
St. Therese once told her sister Celine that when we trust ourselves and not God, our soul becomes barren and incapable of virtue. Her remedy? External works of charity. We all try to do it on our own sometimes without asking for God's help. At St. Paul Evangelization, we suggest sharing the gospel with someone who needs it. Check out streetevangelization.com to find a team near you where you can share the love of Jesus. If there isn't one in your area yet, perhaps God is calling you to start a team in your city. To learn more, visit streetevangelization.com.
Underwritten in part by the following nonprofit.
Are you paying high prices with a traditional health insurance company that pays for things that violate your conscience? There's an alternative available. Solidarity HealthShare is a community of faithful individuals and families that never share into immoral medical services, all while saving you money with prices starting as low as $85 per month for singles and $512 for families. Never fund another abortion with your healthcare dollars. Call 844-313-4999 to learn more.
Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866-AVE-MARIA or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
Hi, I'm Father Chris Alar of the Marian Fathers of the Immaculate Conception. My new book, Understanding the Sacraments, unpacks the extraordinary gifts unique to the Catholic Church. Ever wonder why we baptize infants? Is confession in the Bible? And must wives be subordinate to their husbands? The answers to these more hot-button questions about the sacraments are on sale now from Marian Press at shopmercy.org. God bless you.
He is honored by the Church as a saint with the title of the Angelic Doctor.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Thomas Aquinas wrote a basic textbook for young theology students that became the Church's most famous guide to the faith, the Summa Theologica. It helped him earn the title Doctor of the Church. He died in 1274.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Why does the Catholic Church obligate its members to attend Mass on Sundays? For Christians, Sunday, the first day of the week or the eighth day, replaces the seventh day, the Sabbath, as the day to reserve for worshiping God. The Sabbath represents the completion of the first creation. When Jesus Christ arose from the dead on Sunday, he inaugurated the new creation. Thus, Sunday became the Lord's Day and is now the foremost holy day of obligation in the universal church, as we are told in the Catholic Catechism. We are bound to attend Mass under pain of grave sin unless there is a serious reason for not doing so. Sundays are also called to be a day of rest. Christians are bound to abstain from work which impedes worshiping God and the joy of the Lord's Day. This is Peggy Stanton, and this has been the Order of Malta's Minute with the Catechism.
Strained or broken relationships are a given in most of our lives. Friends fall away, siblings drift apart, children sever ties with their parents, and despite our best efforts, these painful fissures are difficult to mend. Hi, I'm Dr. Ray. If you want to learn how to communicate better with the difficult people in your life and be a more easygoing, more forgiving person, check out my book, How to Get Along with Almost Everybody. Check it out, and all my other books on the store page at AveMariaRadio.net. That's AveMariaRadio.net.
Michael, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
So, I want to address an overarching principle of the core before we go into the conversation of anti-human philosophies that really induce despair that we are seeing creeping up. So, let's talk about a Christian vision of the person of society.
Sure. So, we begin at the Acton Institute. Every Acton University begins with the first course is the one I teach is on a Christian vision of the human person. And so the idea, of course, behind that is how we think about the human person, how we understand what it means to be a person is going to shape the way we think about politics, economics, marriage, life, love, everything else. And I think even many Christians, we tend to appropriate secular ideas of the person, maybe only partially. And so what I do in that lecture is I go over kind of what are the key characteristics of what does it mean to be a person. So, of course, I begin first with reason, right, that we're created in the image of God. But reason is not simply discursive, kind of rational thought, like building things or solving a problem. It is that, but it's also much more than that. It's poetic knowledge. It's intuition. Mm-hmm. It's what's called connatural knowing in the tradition. And here I think it's the work of Benedict XVI is just so very, very important. I mean, Benedict XVI in the famous Regensburg Address, which you know well, Marcus, he said that we have limited reason and rationality to the empirical, which means, it sounds kind of complex for radio, but what it means is that in order for something to be considered reasonable nowadays, it has to be empirically verifiable. It has to be scientific. Right. The problem with that, there's many problems, but the two big ones are, number one, that position is incoherent on its own terms. That's right. And what I mean by that is that you cannot empirically verify the claim that reason is only empirical. Right. So science, why is reason better than non-reason? Right. Why should we do science? Why does empirical evidence matter? There's no empirical reasoning for this, right? This is a deeper kind of reasoning, a deeper kind of idea. And so, but the second problem, and I think this is very important, and it'll connect to what we're talking about later, is that when you reduce reason to the empirical, you take the most important human experiences, love, mercy, friendship, forgiveness, kindness, compassion. You take and justice, and you take these things, and you move them outside the realm of reason. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes simply a feeling, emotion. It's like a competition of emotions. But it's interesting because Benedict XVI uses the words from C.S. Lewis. This leads to an abolition of man. Yep. And it also creates a problem because people don't have a framework how they can deal with their deepest emotions. And so I think this loss of what it means to be a human person and this loss of rationality, it sounds very academic, but I think it has very practical ways in how people deal with anxiety, how people understand themselves, how people understand love and emotions, and how they react to those things. So that's the first. And then, of course, I go through the importance of human freedom. And that freedom, the two dominant ways, Marcus, the way we think of freedom, right? One is that we are not free, right? That we're just ultimately determined, right? We're determined by our neurobiology, we're determined by our environment, by our culture, our genetics. And what I love about the Catholic vision of the human person is it says, well, of course we're shaped by that, because we're made out of the dust of the earth. We are embodied persons, which I'll get to. So, of course, we're shaped by our neurobiology. We're shaped by what we eat for breakfast, right? Because we're made out of the dust of the earth. But we're not solely determined by it. That's right. And the great Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which, of course, you know, but if you haven't listened to it, you should buy it, Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychiatrist. He was put into Auschwitz, and there he experienced the worst possible restrictions of his freedom and degradation of his as a human being, and he realized even there, I'm free. There's something fundamental free to us that no one can take away. And so determinism is one of the areas. The other false understanding of freedom, which is very dominant today, is that freedom is simply an exercise of the will, right? We can just exercise our will. We just do stuff. We can do whatever we want. And guess what? That's partially true too. And again, why the Catholic vision of the human person is we don't reject the fact that we're influenced by our biology, and we don't reject the fact that, yeah, we can do whatever we want, right? And Cardinal Ratzinger, before he became Benedict XVI, in his great book, Truth and Tolerance, he says, the problem is doing whatever we want actually becomes a diabolical kind of freedom. And he says that just doing what we want irrationally, and that an irrational will is not a free will.
That's right.
So, Marcus, the way I explain it all the time, to kind of translate Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, I say, if I start banging my head, on the end of a table and blood shoots out, no one is going to look at me and think, wow, Michael's so free, right? Everyone's going to think I'm crazy because an irrational will is not a free will. And I think he importantly says it leads to a diabolical freedom. So if I just do what I want, I'm going to create hell on earth for myself and for others. So the Catholic vision of freedom is that, yes, we are impacted. This is why we take culture so seriously. Yes, we can do whatever we want, but the real purpose of freedom is to love, to give ourselves in sacrifice for others. And when we do that, and this is you see all through the epistles, right, all through the Hebrew Bible, through the books of the New Testament, but in the epistles, like be kind to one another, speak to one another in the Psalms, treat each other with respect, treat others, anticipate one another in showing respect. When we follow the commandments and we use our freedom for love, then we create a civilization of love. And then we create also the conditions, going back to the determinist one, where people actually can flourish and their freedom develops. So I go through those things, and I go through the importance of our social nature, that we're not radical individuals, but we don't simply exist for the community. We're born into a family. We're born into a culture. I go through questions, of course, the importance of the reality of sin. We're good, but we're fallen. And so this has political consequences and economic consequences, of course, but also that the reality of sin, we deeply sense that we have done something wrong. We need atonement. And so sin is not some kind of Jansenist thing to make you feel bad about yourself. It's to realize that we are, in fact, in need of a redeemer. Right. And I love Psalm 51, which says, God loves truth in the heart. And he knows what we've done. And that truth in the heart, he calls us to come to his love, to be redeemed and to be forgiven. And so we talk about that. And then, of course, I talk about embodiment. And I think this is a really big problem. You see this problem, of course, with transhumanism, with transgender. You see it with a lot of different things across the board, even identities. And this is the very, very important part of the Christian philosophy of the person, that we are embodied persons. We do not have bodies. We're not driving around in our body like we're driving around in a car. We are embodied. And importantly, our bodies are not accidents, right? And so this is a really important thing. St. Thomas Aquinas says very powerfully, I am not my soul. Right? We're embodied. And so there's three kinds of persons, right? There's divine persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then there are angelic persons. And then, of course, there are embodied persons. And one of the things that's so great, most of the philosophies of the person that are dominant and problematic today are Gnostic variants that do not respect the goodness of the body and the goodness of creation. And this is such a beautiful aspect of Catholic anthropology that's not only just fanciful or like lovely or elegant, but actually really aligns with our lived experience as a human being, all of these aspects, right? I mean, Christian anthropology compared to, and then I say Christian anthropology, I mean Christian philosophy or theology of the person, compared to all the derivative, and alternative, secular and others. Christian anthropology is so much more aligned with our lived experience as a person, that more than any of this kind of like a lot of the ideas that you hear, no one actually lives that way, right? The Christian anthropology really aligns with that. But I think this experience, this understanding of embodiment is also so deeply affirmed, not only in the goodness of creation, that God declares creation good, in the incarnation, which is a further affirmation of the body, but that the resurrection of the body, we say in the Creed, we believe in the resurrection of the body and life everlasting. We get our bodies back. They're not accidents. And then, of course, I talk about reasonable emotions, how to think about emotions, love and happiness, and we probably can go to that in more detail another time. But, I think Dietrich von Hildebrand wrote this wonderful book called The Heart, that oftentimes we think we just have passions. But actually, properly understood, C.S. Lewis talks about this, John Paul II talked about this, we have spiritual emotions. This love, forgiveness, a response to the goodness of being, the goodness of other, gratitude and reverence. These are reasonable emotions. They're aligned with our reason, aligned with our will, and aligned with our passions. And so we have to think about those things. I talk about those. And then finally, of course, I talk about the fact that we have an everlasting destiny. We are not made only for this world. I love the line from C.S. Lewis in The Weight of Glory where he says, "You've never met a mere mortal." Yeah. We're immortals, and we're either immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. And that so important. I end my talk by saying, quoting from Lewis, that all of our loves, all of our politics, all of our play, all of our economics, I add that to everything we do, has to be seen and done in the light that we are, in fact, everlasting splendors. Right. That's that we have an everlasting destiny. And so I think these things are not only important for just theology, they're very important for politics, they're very important for economics, but they're also just important for having a healthy emotional life. And I think a lot of the anxiety and struggles that people have today are because we've separated from a rich Christian anthropology. So it's a big blessing that the church gives us, and we start every Acton University with that, and that's what I did. That was my first class.
We're talking with Michael Matteson Miller, Chief of Strategic Initiatives, Senior Research Fellow and Director of the Center for Social Flourishing. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
When the need for senior care arises, home is where the heart is. Visiting Angels provides home care for mom or dad up to 24 hours per day, including personal care, meals, and light housework. You may select your professional caregiver with Visiting Angels. More information at visitingangels.com or at 877-374-LIVE. That's 877-374-LIVE. Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care.
This program brought to you in part by Ave Maria, Florida, a big kind of small town where golf carts take you everywhere and there's always something fun around the corner. Discover championship golf, resort-style amenities, and a town center full of shopping and dining. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at its heart, it's a community full of connection and charm. More than 25 model homes are available for viewing. More information can be found at avemaria.com. That's avemaria.com.
The following program is brought to you in part by mycatholicwill.com. Surveys show that more than half of Americans do not have a will. At mycatholicwill.com, it takes as little as 15 minutes to write your will and secure a legacy of faith. MyCatholicWill.com is the exclusive online destination for creating a Catholic will. The process of writing a will is simple and now more accessible than ever. MyCatholicWill.com, a legacy of faith for those you love.
Ave Maria School of Law is the Roman Catholic law school in the United States. Consistently ranked in the Princeton Review as one of the best and most conservative law schools, as well as pre-law's most devout law school. Ave Maria School of Law provides a traditional legal education while emphasizing how the law intersects with the Catholic intellectual tradition and natural law philosophy. Ave Maria School of Law, unabashedly Catholic, consistently excellent. For more information, visit avemarialaw.edu.
Living the Beatitudes with Father Bjorn.
Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. If you're on a football team, you don't want to just run up and down the field holding the ball and never cross into the end zone and get a touchdown. We want to reach our goal, but there are a lot of obstacles, discouragement, and challenges along the way. Jesus' voice is the one calling us to say yes to him, to live the life that he is calling us to live. We have to choose one way or the other, choose him or not. But if we choose him, we will be opposed. We're going to have people challenge what we believe or call us crazy. But Jesus doesn't just say, come follow me, to follow a beatitude. He's calling us to be like himself. He is the Beatitudes. He doesn't just say, do what I say. He says, come follow me. He's with us every step of the way, transforming our weakness into strength. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
For more about the Beatitudes, visit EWTNRC.com.
It's time for Family Man with Dr. Gregory Popcak.
God isn't content to love us from a distance. That's why he emptied himself, was born a man, walked among us, suffered, died, and rose again. That's why, having ascended to the Father, he gives us the sacraments, all so that we can experience his extravagant love through our senses. Being generously and appropriately affectionate with our kids is an important way to teach them about Christ's own embodied, extravagant love. There's nothing stingy or reserved about the way God loves his children, you and me. and we're called to love our children as demonstratively as He loves us. To discover more ways your family can celebrate the liturgy of domestic church life, check out the newest editions of Parenting with Grace and visit CatholicCounselors.com. I'm Dr. Greg Popchak, but you can call me Family Man.
To discover more ways faith can enrich your life, visit CatholicCounselors.com.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, coming to you from Acton University 2025. I'm talking with Michael Matteson Miller, who is the Chief of Strategic Initiatives at the Acton Institute. And we're talking in this segment about the 5 attacks against the dignity of the human person. So, Michael, when we last left off, you started talking about all of these principles that makes a human person. As you mentioned, there's a lot of neo-Gnosticism that's making the waves, but it's not like the church throughout its history has ever been devoid of it. We've seen different iterations of it. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, in all of his philosophical thought, pushed forward this man is born free, everywhere else he's in chains. And so this interior expressive individualism, in the face of this, the church's answer for embodiment, that we are body, soul, composite beings, is a remedy for purpose and meaning, and therefore flourishing as an individual and society. So I want to invite you to pick up from there.
Right, Marcus. That's very well said. I mean, this is a challenge from the beginning. I was actually talking to someone here at Acton University. He said, you know, it's like Gnosticism never goes away. Why not? And it's almost like we were talking about this. I mean, there's this speculation, but it's almost like concupiscence is the effect of original sin, and so is Gnosticism. We just have this tendency towards Gnosticism and a tendency toward kind of escaping the body and this, you know, somehow kind of there's a technical solution to the problems of evil, sin, suffering, and death, and there's not. But so what I do in my talk, it's a talk called 5 False Anthropologies, or Against Anti-Human Philosophies of Despair. And I gave this in Rome, and I've given it a couple places, and so I gave it here this year. And so I go through the 5 dominant philosophies of the person that I think shape the way so many people think today. And then I give the Christian philosophy of the person as really the only answer to it. Right. I mean, we can take time and go through why these philosophical ideas are in error. And I'm happy to do that all day long. But I think the only really effective apologia to solve the problem is actually a representation, a reproposing of the good news of the human person, right? John Paul II says it is this idea of the human person, the Christian idea of the human person, it transformed the ancient world. Right. It amazed the ancient world. And he said, it's the same thing that can amaze today. And that's our job in the modern world, he said, to go out and give this gospel. And Benedict XVI said, you know, people are alienated. They're in dark waters of alienation, and they need the gospel of Jesus Christ. But let me go through, I think, 5 of what I think are the most dominant ones, and they're all kind of overlapping and related. So the first one is what I call plastic anthropology. Right? It's a new ontology of the person, a new metaphysics of the person, and I'm going to do it short because of time, but essentially, a Catholic vision of the person sees that we have an essence. We're a certain kind of being created in the image of God with certain characteristics that we talked about in the last section or segment. And then we're also unique, unrepeatable beings. And so within that, we're an instantiation of a certain kind of being, a certain kind of person. We have an essence. So in plastic anthropology, this gets inverted. And so, you know, people like Jean-Paul Sartre and others had started out with existentialism, where you're just that kind of raw existence. But raw existence doesn't give you anything to hang rights on. So what actually happens is it begins to have you start with raw existence. You're just this raw existence, free, whatever you want to do, but then you choose your own essence, as it were, right? And so this is a malleable essence, right? And so it's most evident in kind of LGBTQ, all right? But you actually see it in soft ways, in like just everybody's idea, you know, their identity. I'm a fisherman. That's right. I'm a this, or, you know, I like Apple, or whatever it is. I mean, everybody's kind of trying to find themselves, and they're always kind of changing. Now, in one sense, there's truth to that. Again, like I said in the last segment, right? We have the power of self-creation. Yep. We can create ourselves. And St. Thomas talks about this. John Paul II talks about this. But we create ourselves within an essence. In plastic anthropology, there's no essence. You choose it. Exactly. And so the obvious one, of course, LGBTQ, you choose your essence. And once you choose it, the plastic hardens. That's who you are. Now, this is a problem on many levels. I think it's an injustice. We often identify people with their disorders, their struggles. So, many times, people who are struggling with sexual dysphoria or other things, they are victims of abuse. And so we acquit the abuser by saying, oh, that's just who you are. We would never, Marcus, tell someone who has anorexia, well, that's just who you are.
Right.
Starve yourself until you die. No, of course not, because we are not identified by our pathologies. We are not identified by our struggles. Right. We are identified as sons and daughters of the living God. And so so there's so many problems with that. But it's also a big problem for religious liberty, because if who you are, right, if it becomes who you are, if you're identified by your sexual predilection, well, what you hold, your Catholic belief, is not important as who you are. So it almost becomes like a discrimination.
Right.
And so this is a longer thing we could talk about. But I mean, it's in Yoga Principles of the UN. It's in German law. It's, of course, in Michigan in Proposal 3 is also making all reproductive areas, everything around sexuality, kind of a constitutional right. So there's political elements. But I think the fundamental one is there's injustice to people who are vulnerable. People who are struggling we're not helping them go through the difficulties of life. We're treating them really and almost using them for political purposes. And I think it's just super important to say, and I say this in my talk, and I want to say it here, these are complex issues. People are suffering. People are struggling. It's important, I think, as Catholics that, yes, we must tell the truth. We must always tell the truth, but we must do it in love. Mm-hmm. And we must, I think, avoid kind of getting into only politicizing everything. We have to do it through kind of, in a caring way while we tell the truth. All right, about it. So this is a big problem, plastic anthropology. The next one is transhumanism.
Yep.
And transhumanism is also a multifaceted phenomena. Transgenderism is actually a subset of transhumanism also, by the way, not just plastic anthropology. But transhumanism is the idea that we can combine our biology with technology. Mm-hmm. And in doing, we create a new kind of being. So it's very, very much it's very much an evolutionary Darwinist idea that we're in a stage of evolution, and the new stage of evolution is the combination of biology and technology. And so, some of this stuff.
If I may present, just an added point for you to consider or share with, it also presents a ship of Theseus problem when we think about the technological advancements, if you will, of the human body, and so. When you're talking about, sorry, I don't want to interrupt too much, but when you're talking about transhumanism in that regard, there's real disdain for the material constituent principle that is the body.
100%. It's a Gnostic disdain for the body.
Right. To pick up from there. Please.
Yeah. So in transhumanism, so one sense is like, okay, if we have to like go, so you'll see that here's where you see it. Like there's certain kinds of aspirational transhumanism, like we're going to upload ourselves to the internet.
Right,
we don't even need a body to live anymore.
That's right.
Right? Or we're going to have life extension. Marvin Minsky, the very famous MIT computer scientist, they said to him, will robots inherit the earth? And he said, yes, they'll be our children. Right? So that we're going to become a new kind of cyborg. Right? You see it this way. And you see it, of course, with eugenics, with designer babies, which Pope Francis is condemned very strongly. Of course, Pope Leo is going to do the same thing. Yep. Right? I don't know if he said anything about it yet, but he will, I'm certain. I mean, this kind of technological worldview is also what Carl Stern, the great psychiatrist, called a flight from woman. It's a flight from birth. It's a flight from love and children and women. There's a lot of complexity around this that I can't get into. But transhumanism is a big problem. I think the next one I think is just a person as a cog. You're just a human resource. You just survive. You see it, of course, the worst in like the Chinese state, right? Like in communism, where people are just murdered just because they're in service of the state. They have no value whatsoever. But we see it in certain kinds of capitalist factories where people are not respected. You see it in World Economic Forum ideology of like, oh, you'll own nothing and be happy. It rejects our embodied, embedded cultural nature. So the person as a cog. I think the next one is the person as a scourge.
Yep.
This you see especially in environmentalism, that somehow human beings are a problem for the planet. Again, we have to be merciful. I sometimes put a picture of Greta Thunberg up, and sometimes people laugh. But we really have to have compassion. I don't mean we have to affirm her errors. We should absolutely critique her errors. That's what love is, to critique error. But we have to have compassion. I mean, this little girl has been propagandized. She's totally confused.
Right.
And she thinks of herself as really a scourge. Right. And to be a scourge is such a there are young ladies who are sterilizing themselves, as you know, Marcus, because they want to save the planet. Right? And so I think this is we have to really work on this. Well, this is why the Christian gospel that affirms the goodness of being, the goodness of matter, the goodness of the body, the goodness of marriage, the goodness of children is so very important. And then the final one, which I can only talk about briefly, but I think is really in a sense, the capitulation of all of these is the person as a commodity. We're just a commodity to be traded. And I think the work of the great late Catholic philosopher Augusto del Noce explains this well, that he has this concept of pure bourgeois, which is like, he said, we no longer have Christian bourgeois. We no longer have a Christian commercial society. And I'm summarizing it. But we have pure bourgeois. Every single thing becomes an object of trade. He said the hippie became a yuppie, and the yuppie mentality is a rejection of family, tradition, objective order of values, and thinking that we can get happiness by purchasing it. And everything becomes an object of trade. My body, egg, sperm, everything is an object of trade. And I think this has deep problems on young people. They feel commoditized, and social media, of course, exacerbates this. And so this is why the gospel, that is the good news about the human person, that we are, in fact, created in the image of God, loved and willed for our own sake. It's just such an important message. But anyway, so that's a long talk. I actually have, I can share with your listeners, I gave this talk and I put the text out on my website, The Moral Imagination, so you can find it there. It's called Against Anti-Human Theologies of Despair. If you want to tell your listeners about that, that's fine. So I actually have the whole thing kind of written out, but because it's a bit of a complex issue. But I think the key also, this thing I'll also finish with, and something that Benedict XVI stressed, the unique message of the Jewish and Christian tradition is that being is good. That God created the world good. We're not made out of dragon's blood. We're not made by some pagan demon. No. We are made good. Being is good. Matter is good. Our bodies are good. The incarnation affirms this. And I think this is really the joy of the Christian message. And this is something we have to just go into. And the last thing, Benedict says, anthropology is our strength. There's no secular articulation that is as coherent philosophically. Not even close. Experientially, psychologically, not even close. And so it's a real treasure to really be in this Catholic tradition, and something I think we should rejoice in. And so I encourage you, all of the listeners, study what it means to be a human person. And this beautiful question that Psalm 8 says, who is man, Lord, that you are mindful of him? Well, we are his children. So it's a beautiful thing.
My guest has been Michael Matteson Miller, Chief of Strategic Initiatives at the Acton Institute, and we've been talking about, essentially the dignity of the human person and attacks and affronts against it. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.